having a slightly like below average co-founder is much, much worse than being solo. I wasn't like following the footsteps of like, oh, first you need a pitch deck and then you talk to investors and then try to find a co-founder and then hopefully you raise money and then you start building. I just saw the opportunity and I started building. Dictatorships make your chances of success much higher. If you have trust in the founder and you think they're smart enough and they have input on how to build the product and how to get customers, then it should be a dictatorship. You don't want them to be slowed down. If you bootstrap to 100 million ARR AI business, anyone would call that a success. And like it's a success for the founder and for the team. But I don't think it would be considered a success if you raised 100 million.
What's the case for solo founding?
The case for solo founding is that it's very hard to lose. The biggest reason is co-founder breakup. Because if you don't have breakup, you can just like pivot or you can just try to raise more money or there is a lot of other options. I like the fact that everything is my fault and like being solo gives me that satisfaction.
Chatbase has had this incredible journey, $9 million in ARR in about 3 years. There was this opportunity that you saw, and I'm really curious what that opportunity was, like how you saw it, because that ultimately, pursuing it was the thing that kind of got you to building this great business. So let's just start there. When you saw the opportunity, what did that look like?
Yeah, this was very early on. This was even before ChatGPT was launched. I was using the DaVinci 003 models. So way back in the day, back then it was, there was no like API where you can send a chat and like get back a response. It was just you're talking to the base model, just the completion, not chat completion. And then I saw the idea of this is a very powerful model, but it doesn't have custom data. It doesn't have your data. And that in the very first version of Chatbase, it was just uploading a PDF and then talking to it. So like my idea was uploading maybe a textbook or just like a book or a website or anything and then having a chat with it. And of course now it seems obvious that this like makes sense and is a good idea and people would want that. But I talked to a lot of people back then and I don't know if it was very obvious. I think some people didn't see the value or maybe they saw the value, but they didn't see the models improving. They just saw like what existed now. And maybe that was not super, super helpful because the models were not there yet. But yeah, I thought there is a very good chance the models will improve because now there's all of these big companies that are working towards the same thing. So I think I started Chatbase with a very good idea, which is adding custom data to like the base model, and then I bet on the models improving, which was not very popular back then, and I think that's how we just like kept growing as the AI wave has been like we've been riding it from since 3 years ago.
So that's really interesting. But in order for you to even get there, to realize, hey, we should make it so that you can chat with a PDF, for instance, you needed to be exploring and playing around with these things. So what was it causing you to even play around with DaVinci in the first place? Like, where were you? Is I think that oftentimes when people are trying to come up with ideas and things to work on, sometimes they're trying to artificially do it. And it feels like in many ways, you kind of came across this through the process of exploring things and tinkering with things. So maybe you can give a little bit of a frame of reference for people when they're trying to understand how you approached it. And maybe that would be something that they could apply to their lives as well.
Yeah, I think, like honestly, there's no shortcut. Like the only thing you can do is just to like try things. And then because you're trying things and because you're talking to other people and because you're in the, like in the group chats, in the community, you're seeing the new things that people are releasing, you're getting inspired, then you come up with a good idea, or like at least you see potential in some ideas. So the way this happened for me was, so I was in my last semester in university in Canada, and I was doing internships, but I was also doing side projects with the goal of just like having something that can make money. So I was like inspired by, people like Peter Levels, for example. And I was doing other projects. I had the project called Rate My Courses. I had another project called EssayPal. But because I was like tinkering with things and, like trying the APIs, trying to do stuff that the APIs can't do yet, just like trying things. I saw RAG, which was I saw it very, very early on. And I think that was, the spark that started Chatbase. And it wasn't even called RAG back then. It was just like, I don't think there was a name. It's just like you add data, you add data to a base model so that it can know more things. So I saw some people like writing papers about that. Some people were creating like CLI tools about that, but there was no product that you can like open a website, add a document, and then chat with it. So yeah, I think for me it was obvious that like this is something people would need, and I just stopped everything I'm doing in university. I just like stopped going to class, and I had the conviction that like this is an opportunity that doesn't come often, and like to be able to see that very early. And of course, like I didn't know how big it's gonna be, but I had some conviction on like, oh, this might actually be an opportunity. And I just stopped doing anything else and I started executing. And then, I think like a month and a half after, I was coding by hand back then, so it was still slow. A month and a half after like getting the idea, I released the first version of Chatbase.
There's two things that I would love for us to talk about, regarding that sort of early days of figuring this out. I think that one is that people often think that they need to have the right idea and they kind of just try and go straight to figuring out the right idea. It seems like there were a bunch of things that you were trying, and then ultimately you found Chatbase sort of through that process of building those other things. And that ultimately caused you to, put those other things to the side. So I'd be really curious just your philosophy and sort of what you learned around building those other things that kind of got you to the position where you'd actually discover the Chatbase opportunity. And then maybe the other thing would be really cool to talk about, and I think would be really useful for people to hear, is how you actually got that sense that it was time to put the other things away.
Yeah.
And including school, but particularly the other projects, and go all in on this. Because I think that one thing that sometimes people have is they do that, kind of try out a bunch of things, but they have a hard time kind of abandoning them all and putting all of the wood behind one arrow. So maybe talk about sort of that first part, though. We could talk about sort of the focusing and doubling down. How do you think about sort of the process of like tinkering with other ideas and how it ultimately potentially drove you towards discovering the opportunity for Chatbase?
Yeah. So I think like the normal way to go about things is that you look at the market, you look at competitors, you like research what they're good at, you see their reviews, you see what their customers are saying. And then from all of that research, you come up with a business idea. But I think in practice, I don't think any business started out like on day one with the idea that it ended up being as it grew much bigger. And I think it's the same even for Chatbase, even after I saw that idea. So I think for me, what happened was I was working on multiple things. I saw one thing that it seemed to me like just from first principle thinking, like it just seemed to me that this is very powerful. And by just thinking about the effects of something like this, just like sitting down and thinking, it's just no market research, no talking to users, nothing like that. And I think that's the only way in a fast moving industry like AI, because you don't have time to talk to users because there is no users to talk to. Like this is like it's like it's a new paradigm. Like there's no one to like, interrogate about something like this because they've never used something like this. So I think a lot of things in AI will be about like seeing what is possible now and like what just became possible, and just like build something around it. And then while you're building, you'll find, the universe pushing you towards like a certain direction because of many things, because of like, maybe there is a limitation in one idea, but you find out another idea that works. Or maybe you talk to some people and like, it seems like, hey, this is an approach that you can do things. And I think if I think about all the successful tools that came up from like after the LLM era, um, I think a lot of them started out that way. It was as soon as the technology is ready for something, you see someone build that something very quickly. Like for example, OpenClaw or even Cloud Code and stuff like that, because the models are now capable enough to, do long running tasks, to like run multiple tools, to have access to the CLI and not hallucinate. Um, because it's a new paradigm, it comes from just first principles thinking and not heavily like talking to like doing a lot of market research or talking to a bunch of users, because it's a new paradigm.
One thing I think you've talked with me about in the past, like over dinner or something, is like urgency and sort of this sense that once you discovered this opportunity, at least the first version of what Chatbase would be, you felt like there was a real urgency to get it out there and sort of be the first. And maybe that also ties into that thing I was talking about earlier that I thought would be interesting to hear, which is sort of that decision to put everything else aside. You had other apps that you were working on, maybe varying degrees of success and promise with those. You had school. So how does urgency tie into that decision and the decision that you ultimately made to put all the other things aside?
Yeah, so I think for me, the reason I was urgent, or like I had a lot of urgency, was not actually right. It was the belief that like you can do ideas that other people are doing. Like you have to do, like, I don't know. I think a lot of people, when you talk to them about like a startup idea, they say, "Oh, but that exists." And I had like the same like misconception that, oh, I need to do this now because if I wait, I know like this idea is good and someone else will do it. So I just need to do it now. But I think like the reasoning was maybe not right, but the result was I needed urgency. And that, of course, was the right thing to do. And a big reason I would say for the success of Chatbase was the timing. And like I think that helped us stay bootstrapped, because as soon as we launched, we had revenue. Maybe like I think I had the first payment through Stripe 30 minutes after I put out a pricing page. So I think if you're building an AI, especially now, like now it's extremely competitive. Like now it's very obvious that like this is the future and you want to be part of it. So everyone is building. So I think now it's even more important to have urgency, but at the same time to still make sure that you are opinionated and not just, like following the trends of like what's popular now and then like jumping to the next thing. Because I think it's very hard to run like a scalable business that way.
You've bootstrapped as a solo founder to 9 million ARR over 3 years. You have quite a following on X because people are fascinated and they want to follow in your footsteps. At the same time, when you started, you didn't have a lot of a following. You didn't really have much of an audience at all. You had no revenue to start. You were, I guess, still in school. So what was it actually like back then? How did you decide to be solo? Like, what was the backstory there?
I think what helped is that I wasn't in SF. So I think I didn't like think about like what people do when they want to start a company or like what the steps are. I was just, like I just saw the idea and I started building it. I wasn't thinking too much, oh, do I need to raise? Do I need a co-founder? And maybe not everyone should do that, and that doesn't work with every business, of course. But like to me, just the truth was I saw the idea and like I started building. I wasn't like following the footsteps of like, oh, first you need a pitch deck and then you talk to investors and then you try to find a co-founder and then hopefully you raise money and then you start building. I just saw the opportunity and I started building. And what helped was, as I said, like we had revenue very quickly. So, and also we had like a lot of customers quickly, and I was alone. So I didn't have time to go like find a co-founder and raise money. Like it was just all of my time was spent on, just building the product and then talking to customers. And maybe if I had more time to like think about things, I would have tried to find a co-founder or raise. But yeah, I think I just didn't have the time to do so. And I had like some angry customers calling me, at 2 a.m. So like that was my whole day, just building and improving the product and talking to customers until it got to a point where like I can run this profitably and hire people. And it's been that way since then.
It feels like in many ways, solo founding, especially solo founding with the bootstrapping component, which I guess over dinner last night, we described this as free solo, is bootstrapping solo. And then people like Ben, it's like true solo if they're building without any teammates. And we'll talk about team in a few minutes here. When you're building this sort of, this sort of free solo approach, it does feel like it has a lot of that it owes to sort of like the indie hacker kind of movement. And I'm really curious, do you think that we're just moving in a world where the indie hacker was always thought of as a little bit like this is bootstrapping kind of puts a ceiling on things pretty significantly. And indie hacking is quaint and it's about making revenue, but it's not about building big businesses. You have more revenue than a lot of companies that are venture backed 3 years in. So you're doing phenomenally well. You're better than a lot of venture backed companies. So you're kind of changing the narrative around like what a solo bootstrapped company looks like. In the past, people thought it was kind of like this, small business type thing. How do you think about that? How do you think about like what's actually possible with a solo bootstrapped business? And maybe, we've talked a little bit about it, but I'd love to hear kind of what that journey's been like. And did you realize in the early days that it could actually be something like this? I know you started it out with just the premise of making a business that makes some money. So just walk me through a little bit of that.
Yeah, I agree. I think when I was like the indie hacking movement was mainly around building like a lifestyle business, like some people call it like a micro SaaS or something like that. And it's just the idea, like you want to make profit and then go live in Bali, which I think like I think it's extremely valid. And I think it's more possible now with all the AI tools. I think if someone has like enough agency and enough urgency and drive, I think, like that's a very viable path and it sounds fun. For me, I was considering like, like building Chatbase as a lifestyle business, and some people were doing also like multiple projects and running all of them at the same time. But I think I just saw this as like once in a lifetime opportunity for many reasons. I like the timing, how big the market is, how competitive it is. And I think maybe like it's also human, like by nature, like I'm more competitive. Like I couldn't get myself to, this is enough. Let's just go, to the beach and enjoy the profit. So I think a part of it is like the person that is running things and like what their goals are. But for me, the goal was always like, I want to see this through. I want to, like, I think it's hard to find an opportunity like this. And I think people get something like this maybe like 3 times in their whole life, maybe less. And most people don't take advantage. I feel like I did a good job early on by taking advantage. And, somehow I feel like I owe it to myself to like at least see it through, like see its potential. And also it's fun. Like I enjoy doing it. I enjoy seeing, the graphs go up. I enjoy talking to customers and like seeing how this helped them. I enjoy the competitive aspect of it. So it's also fun. And yeah, that's mainly the reasoning on like why I decided to like go all in and maybe raise the ceiling of what maybe like people thought what is possible bootstrapping a company, especially solo.
It really feels like you have raised the ceiling in terms of what people think is possible. And we have no idea just how high that ceiling can go. I'd be super curious to hear about the competitive aspect of this, not competitors, but like you being a competitive person. Is that something that you identified in yourself really early on? What were some of the aspects of being competitive that kind of resonated with you or made you sort of who you were when you were growing up?
Yeah. So I was doing a lot of sports growing up. I think maybe that's one aspect that affected my personality. So I did swimming, I did archery for a long time, and like going to competitions and all of that. I think, especially when you're young and when you with your friends, I think it shapes your it shapes your personality. And I wouldn't say I'm competitive because of I just want to prove other people wrong, or like I think a lot of founders, a lot of people say founders have like a chip on their shoulder, and the reason they do what they do is because it comes from a place of like, I want to prove everyone wrong. I don't think I have that, but I think I think it's fun to, as I said, like to see things through and like see the biggest impact you can make. And to me, I'm more like competing with myself, or like, honestly competing with myself. I want to like see how much I can build this, and like just be proud of what I built. And I think that's the reasoning behind deciding to just go all in and like try to grow this as much as possible, try to get as many customers as possible, try to compete with companies that raised a lot more money than us. So infinitely more money than us.
Yeah.
So yeah.
The swimming and archery, that's interesting. Those are sports that are both individualistic, but also teams, right? Yeah. Archery is also a team, swim team. And you're competing against other people, but you're also competing with yourself.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit more about how you think about those sports and kind of the relationship between the individual, their teammates, and the people that they're playing against? Because they feel like very different than, say, soccer or football or whatever.
Yeah, I think the beautiful thing about individual sports is that you can only blame yourself. And I think, especially when you're young, I think that teaches you a lot about just life and like how you go through life and conduct yourself through life. And I think having that mindset of everything is my fault, I think that's very helpful in sports, but especially in individual sports, and that's what it teaches you. But it's extremely helpful in business. Also, like it's the same. It has the same importance if you're working with more people. I think, especially if you're the CEO, everything is your fault because, like you're the person responsible for anything that's happening in the company. So I think that mindset, even if you're working with other people, I think even if you have co-founders, I think everyone should take responsibility. And I think, like I got that lesson from sports, and I think it helps with businesses, and especially it helps with solo founding a business. But now I have a relatively big team, and like a lot of the value that Chatbase is providing to customers is coming from the team. And I'm very proud to be able to have them, like working with them, especially given that this started out, like in my last semester in school, like building in like a class, for example. So it is very special, but I want to make sure that I give them, the appreciation and recognize what they helped build.
I think this is such an important aspect of it, right? Which is it is actually kind of an interesting thing, because oftentimes people are like, well, they're not solo, they have a team. Of course, most companies do have teams and probably will have teams. Maybe there'll be smaller teams in the future because more leverage for each individual with the tools that they have. But there's this really interesting dynamic, of course, where you're solo, but you build a team.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a very interesting dynamic of going from one person to multiple people. If you have co-founders, you already have done that, right? Because if you have two other co-founders, there's three of you. When you add the first sort of non-founder to the team, you're going from 3 to 4 perhaps, right? But if you're solo and you're adding the
Yeah.
first teammate, you're going from 1 to 2. So it's this big shift. I'm curious what that was like, how you evaluated thinking about when to add the first person, what kind of role that person had. Obviously, this was also at a different time.
Yeah.
So, technology was different, the tools were different. So maybe if you were to actually sort of think about the way that you did hiring, if a company were doing hiring today, they would do different hiring than they would have maybe 3 years ago. But I'm really curious sort of what that was like in the early days of considering bringing on a person to kind of go from being truly solo to having a team.
I didn't have that choice. Like, I think it was extremely obvious that I need to hire someone. It was just this exponential growth, in the first 2 months. I think I hired the first person like 2.5 or 3 months in after the first launch. And it was just impossible to keep up with talking to customers, with building their features, with everything. I think for me, I was lucky because the first person I hired is a friend from school. So like we already had that relationship. And I think it's the same for most startups. I think that would be a good idea to like just hire someone and already trust, because as like everyone says, the first few hires like determine the culture of the company. So I think for me, like at some point, there was no way I can continue doing this solo. And I knew that I wanted to grow this as much as I can. And I hired that first person. He was an engineer, my friend from school. And maybe like a month after, I hired the second person and also a friend. And then it just, like, I think maybe the mistake I made is I hired too slowly even, not because people say like you only hire when it's painful, which I did that, but like not on purpose. But I think I continue to do that. And I think maybe that's one aspect of bootstrapping, that you're kind of forced to be a little bit more careful than if you would have raised. And I think I fell into that. I wouldn't call it a mistake. I think I did what made sense at the time. But I think if maybe I knew a bit more, I would have been more aggressive and like maybe hire faster, spend more money faster. But I think that's what I'm saying about bootstrapping. It's when people think of a bootstrapped company now, it's more like they associate it with like the indie hacking, lifestyle business, which I think it is a big part of it. But now I think you will see hopefully companies like Chatbase, but I think other companies too will be solo founded and maybe bootstrapped, and they will become huge because I think now the technology allows it. And I think now also more and more people want to start companies. And I think like the number of founders is just going up. So I think the number of solo founders will just go up. And bootstrapping is now a viable option to build a generational company. And maybe the mistake that I made of like maybe being too careful very early on and making sure that we're always like very profitable above a certain amount, maybe some people will be more aggressive. And yeah, I see that as like a good strategy if the goal is to build something generational.
So I want to talk a little bit more about sort of the team and sort of how you think about culture and building in real life versus remotely. But before we get into that, I think there's a really interesting point that you made, which is it's more possible than ever before to build bootstrapped and to build to something of really meaningful scale, not sort of like that. I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but some people sometimes do when they say a lifestyle business. There is something really interesting about this idea that you can make a lot of progress with very little and you could essentially be profitable. And then there's the question of what do you do with that? Do you continue to be profitable? And do you raise venture capital? There was somebody in the Solo Founders program who got to $2 million in ARR completely solo, no teammates. And now he hired his first teammate. He had raised a little bit of money, but he didn't touch any of it. It was just that it was there and it didn't end up getting used. So in theory, he could have bootstrapped it, right? Now, will he raise more money? He's debating it. And I think that's a really interesting question that a lot of people have is they have the success as you have or as he has. And now it's a question of, well, should they continue to just grow sort of with profits, especially if they're really profitable, if it's a sort of more software oriented business, or at some point, does it make sense to consider taking money? And you're doing it from a place of leverage that maybe you didn't have before. So I'm curious sort of what your philosophy has been, at least to date, because I'm sure there have been, quite a few times when people have asked about, potentially investing, that sort of thing.
Like everything else, it depends on, I think the main thing it depends on is the founder's goal. I think there is a ton of advantages to raising. And I think the biggest one is you get to be more aggressive because you have this money and like you're supposed to use it, you're supposed to spend it. And maybe you do some mistakes along the way with hiring and stuff. But I think overall, you just get to move faster, which means you capture more of the market. And in some markets, that's, the name of the game. It's like who's going to get more customers faster. And then also the other advantage, maybe especially if someone like young or maybe that's like their first company or they don't have like a following or something. I think the other advantage is some social proof. When you have like the logo that this firm invested, then it helps a little bit with getting customers and hiring. But I would say the biggest advantage is just being more aggressive because I know I was like this, and I think other maybe bootstrap founders also had the same problem. It's just it's not the same when you're spending your own money, like customer revenue. You want to make sure that it's ROI positive all the time. You want to make sure that you see the results very quickly, which also like is a good mindset to have. But in some cases, you want to like be more aggressive and experiment and maybe do some things that are maybe sound stupid, but they have like some chance of success. But yeah, I think that's the main reason to raise if you already have profit. But I would say on the other side, like why people would not raise if they have a growing business is one, they think maybe it's like they're delusional, but they think they can build a brand that is strong enough that they don't need to associate it or like to borrow brand equity from a big firm, which I feel like that's the goal for me. Like I want to be able to, like maybe it's stupid, honestly, but I'm just saying, I have like the confidence, the self-confidence that I can make this a strong brand that people recognize, that people want to use, that, it's not like the alternative to something. It is just the best tool to use. And I think I can do that without raising. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is about just maybe optionality and control. So of course, you have like maximum optionality and control when you're on your own. Some people value that. I value it to some extent. And then I would say that the third reason is the definition of success changes as soon as you raise. So it depends also on the person, but if you bootstrap to 100 million ARR AI business, I mean, I think anyone would call that a success. And like it's a success for the founder and for the team. But I don't think it would be like considered a success if you raised 100 million. And I think for me, and like I think for other businesses too, it might be easier to get to what you consider success if you don't raise, because just the ceiling just changes so much. And I think even if you have the self-confidence, even if you know you built an amazing product that customers love, like I don't think anyone knows what's happening in AI now. It's very unpredictable. So there is an argument to be made that it's just higher chances of success if you bootstrap.
There's something really remarkable about Chatbase's growth. And clearly there was the timing, as you said, and there were a bunch of sort of external factors, but there's also you and the team. And it's not like you just built one product and that was what the product is today. It's very different than what you started with. And I think that that's perhaps something that's really worth talking about, because I think people would really benefit from hearing kind of, you start with one thing and you end up at a really different place, maybe a place that you hadn't necessarily predicted. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that. Like Chatbase, what was it the very early days? And then maybe take us quickly through to where we are today.
Yeah. No, I think you should, like, the product should change over time. Like, that's the whole point of, building the product, is it evolves as the market evolves, as your customers' needs evolve, as your goals evolve. Like, I don't think it makes sense to, plan the next year in advance and just like ignore everything that's happening around you. That doesn't make sense, especially in AI when everything is moving fast. Like, you need to be flexible enough, and you need to also communicate that with the team, that we have like an idea of we have a strong plan. We know what we want to build, but you also have like the flexibility, and the team is small enough and fast moving enough that you can like change things as, like the technology changes, or as the market needs changes, or like as a new like competitor enters the market. So you have to have that quick moving ability. And I think also that's easier when you're bootstrapping, when you're on a smaller team, because you have control and you're just a dictator. Like, you can just decide what you want to do. And I think like dictatorships are good when you're trying to build a company, because that's a tangent, but I think.
Say more about that, though. I mean, like, I've heard it described as like benevolent dictatorship.
Yeah.
Say more, because I think that's something that's relevant to solo founding, right? Which is that sometimes when you have co-founders, it can be somewhat, somewhat difficult to necessarily get to the really pointed decision that needs to be made.
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, talk more about the benevolent dictatorship.
Yeah, I think it's very important. And I think, like, of course, I don't know the inner workings of like the biggest companies, but I think you associate every big company with one person, and they're the face of the company and they're the decision maker. And I think like dictatorships make your chances of success much higher, because like there is two scenarios. One, the founder is smart and the team trusts them, and they have the agency and they have the skill to build an amazing company. And in that case, you want them to be a dictator. You don't want them to be slowed down, but like by convincing everyone about their like thought process, and like making sure that a consultant comes from outside to validate, their thinking and all of that. So if you have trust in the founder, and you think they're smart enough and they have input on how to build the product and how to get customers, then it should be a dictatorship. And then on the other side, like if the founder is not smart enough, and if they like their team doesn't have like full trust in them, then this company is not going to work anyway, whether or not it's a dictatorship. So the only way you like have like a very big success is being a right like dictator. Like your decisions are right, and you don't waste time convincing everyone about what you want to do. So I think it just makes you move faster. It makes pivoting, like not pivoting, but like product decisions very fast, and even pivoting if it comes to that. So I think that's like one of the biggest advantages of building, like being a solo founder. And I think also, if you do have a co-founder, I think it needs to be very clear who's going to be dictator and what. And I think then it can work. But if it's like not very obvious who's doing what, like the responsibilities are like there is a gray area, then I think it becomes a very big problem.
Maybe let's shift it back to before we went on this little rabbit hole, which was a really good one. Sort of how maybe that benevolent dictatorship or whatever caused you to go, from place to place to actually get from first version of Chatbase to where you are today. Because I'm guessing it's not exactly a straight line.
Yeah.
But what was the evolution there, and what were you learning along the way?
Yeah, I think what's interesting in startups in general, but especially in AI startups, is that the inputs change every day, and then you make a decision based on what you know today. But then you shouldn't have ego to say like, like let's say like a week after or a month after, and then some inputs changed, and then the decision you made was a mistake, then you need to like just go in a different direction very easily and like very quickly. And 100% it's not going to be a straight line. It wasn't a straight line for us. I don't think it's a straight line for anyone, because especially in AI, everything is changing so quickly. So your job as a founder, I think, is for like decision making is two things. One, you need to make sure you take in all the inputs that you have today and like make sure you think from first principles on what the best decision is that I can make with everything that I know now, with all the context that I know. But also not having the ego to say, no, we're going to continue doing this after like things change, and making sure that you and everyone on the team are, low ego enough to be able to change your mind very quickly to respond to like everything that's happening around you. That makes, like very long-term planning hard, but it is hard. And I think it's hard for all the startups, and it's even hard for the AI labs and, the people that are creating this technology, because like the truth is no one knows what's going to happen, like 2 months from now, like what the products are going to look like, what the market is going to look like, what the customers will want. It's just very unpredictable. You can have assumptions and like you can have some accuracy, but yeah, you need to be low ego enough to be able to change your mind very quickly. And I think Jeff Bezos had a quote, I forget exactly what it said, but something like, you need to be able to make the decisions that it's very easy to come back from. And I think that's the case for like, especially AI startups. If you have a decision that you can like walk back on, a week from now, if things change, you should do that instead of doing something that it's very hard to walk back on. So yeah, for Chatbase, it was a lot of like thinking, today, like what should we do? And then changing it, a week after, and then like thinking about something new a week after, and then, oh, actually it works. So we don't change it. We're going to continue doing it. And over time, over like, the years, Chatbase became what it is today. And we're still like going through that.
It feels like there's this idea of like one-way door decisions, two-way door decisions. Yeah. Everybody, like, I think the main challenge is that everybody treats all decisions as a one-way door decision. And what you're saying is there's so many decisions that are actually two-way door decisions that are totally reversible. But because we kind of have this human nature of kind of clumping everything together, we treat the two-way door decisions as one-way door, and it makes it really hard. That's probably the biggest impediment on velocity, right? So I'm curious, how do you kind of encourage the team and create a culture for the team to not feel like they're always going through one-way doors, so therefore they have to be extremely careful, maybe not have to always get your permission for things, right? Because you're not steering, but you're directing, right? You're saying, here's the direction we want to go in. And then ultimately, you need to give them the ability and encourage them to do their great work and make their great decisions, because you can't be the person who makes all the decisions. So how do you do that? Like, what's the culture like? How did you think about building the culture? I'm sure that there are things you've learned along the way that were maybe like missteps. Every company has those. I'm just curious what that's been like for you, because this is the first time that you've ever really built a company, right? It's kind of like you were in college, and then now you're running I think it's a 30-person company, $9 million, bootstrapped, solo founder. So walk me through, like walk us, like the listeners, through like what that actually was like, what you've learned about building a culture that supports these things that are important.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me to learn, or like that I learned and that I made sure everyone on the team knows, is that changing your mind is actually good. Like you should change your mind if things change, because I think if you don't like make sure that this is explicit, if you just like let things happen, there's this like social pressure a little bit to like not want to look like you changed your mind, or like to say, oh, actually like this was a bad decision, we should do something else. Changing your mind, like you should change, like actually not changing your mind is a problem, because like inputs are changing very quickly, and sticking to something just because you don't want to look bad is like such a bad idea for the smaller decisions, and then especially for the bigger decisions. So I think in the culture for us, and I think for like a lot of what AI companies should do, I think honestly, like any company, is encouraging, like making sure that if someone decides to change their mind, there is like zero pressure on like, oh, but you said this, or oh, but like we put in all this work to do this, or like the sunk cost fallacy because things have changed. So yeah, and I think like the way you build that culture is by just like one, doing that yourself, and then making sure you communicate that with the team like very regularly, so like it's instilled in you and everyone on the team that this is how we do things.
Now, I think there's something really interesting, and maybe we could sort of transition over to just like what it's actually like to build a bootstrapped company that scales. I think a lot of people have a general sense of maybe what it's like to build these smaller like solopreneur indie hacker businesses that don't scale because it's just one person. But there are some really interesting questions around how to think about profitability versus investing in different things internally, how to think about hiring, how to think about compensating people. I'm sure to some extent, the people that you attract to the company, you attract different types of people because you're a different type of company. So maybe you could share a little bit more about sort of the practical sort of things that you've learned when it comes to like finances and sort of attracting and retaining talent at sort of a scaled bootstrapped company.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, so like rule number one, if you're not rich, like you're not financing this yourself, is you have to be profitable. Like it's not optional. Like you have to be profitable from day one. How profitable is the question, and that's what I was mentioning in like risk tolerance or being aggressive. I think, like of course, when this is like your first company and you're just starting out, it's very unclear like what this will grow into. You tend to be more, conservative and like just want to make sure that this is like the unit economics make a lot of sense. Like that's the number one metric you're tracking. But then as like you gain some moat around the company and like you have some confidence and like the steps that you need to take are clear in order to grow, then once you have that conviction, then you can be more aggressive. I would say you can even start to lose some money from like all the profit that you have been building. And that's what we're like, that's where we are now. Basically, we are investing, I would say like we may be even like spending more money than a lot of like VC-backed companies because we have been profitable for a long time. And now we have a lot of conviction on what we're building. And to me, it's a matter of execution. So I know it's not going to be easy, but the steps are clear. Like we need to do this and this and this, and it's going to grow. And I think that's a very good position to be in. And once you have that, then you should like just go all in, because if you do believe it, then like there is it doesn't make sense to not do that. Like it's not logical. I think that it's like a spectrum on like how aggressive you want to be, and it just depends on like how much conviction you have on, if I do this, then we'll grow. If I put like this amount of money in this one thing, it will grow. Then you just put it because it makes sense. And this also depends on like the person building, like how much risk they want to take. But to me, like in the market we're in and like for the goals that we have, there is no other way around like spending money. So this is what we're doing.
And when it comes to the people that you attract to work at this company, there are some companies that are obviously out there that are trying to raise a lot of money. They're doing it, and they're getting these really large paper valuations that continue to go up, right? And those valuations are usually not tied extremely directly to revenue, right? They might be directionally tied to revenue or success metrics or progress. But it's a different game than like joining a company that's profitable, that's growing really well, that has like, already at your stage, venture scale metrics for a non-VC backed business. What is it like when it comes to recruiting people? Like, what are people looking for when they join your company versus maybe joining one of these companies that's maybe more splashy, but maybe, isn't necessarily, doesn't have like the actual business foundation that you do? I'm curious, like what kind of people are excited about that, what gets them excited, and then also how you think about actually incentivizing people. Is it just the same thing as like venture scales, like venture backed, not venture scale, because you're both venture scale, venture backed startups, or is there something else that you do around dividends, or how do you think about these things? I don't know anything about this world, so I'm really curious about it.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think 100% you attract maybe different types of people. I think it's more difficult a little bit because it's hard to communicate the value. But I think, like, this is the truth. I think it makes a lot more sense to join a company that is bootstrapped and has a lot of like business, like value in the real world, like revenue and customers. It makes a ton more sense because if you are joining a company that like has just raised and, they have like the, like the news article about like the raising and stuff like that, then it's like splashy. I don't know if this is the best move, to be honest, because that means like you're either late, like you might be late. There's a chance that you're late if the company doesn't live up to the very high valuation that they have, which like, of course, some companies do and some companies don't, but it's a risk you're taking. And you need the company to not only grow into that valuation, but grow past it, because like you're taking risk by taking options. You're not taking like just straight out equity, you're taking options. And then the options are going to be based on the valuation that they just raised at. So I feel like it's extremely more risky than to join a company that is bootstrapped. And then like your options mean something because the valuation is not based on, like revenue, like 5 years from now, as a lot of like companies that are VC backed, their valuation is. But I think like I'm trying to put myself, in like the shoes of a candidate. I think the good thing about joining like the splashy, like the company that just raised, I think it looks better on your resume. That's,
social signal.
Yeah, social signal just looks better on your resume. But I think it's just more risky because like you're betting that this company is going to grow not to that valuation, but even more. And it's like, you can make that bet, but it's still a risk you're taking. But I think for some, there's huge companies that are bootstrapped, and I think Ahrefs is bootstrapped, and they do dividends, and like they're growing super, like I think they're over 100 million in ARR. And I think every year they give out like 50% of their, I'm making this up, but I just remembered reading this. But a lot of their profit just goes straight to the employees. So I think that's like you can do stuff like that when you're bootstrapped, and like you can do stuff like that when you do raise. But yeah, for us, like I think what's attractive when I'm like talking to a candidate is, one, like this is like we don't have like the paper valuation, so you don't have like the problem with the options. And then two, you get to take on like much more responsibility just because like this is a smaller team, and you just like tend to move up extremely quickly because by the fact like but this is being a small team. And also like bigger companies are more like hiring executives from like outside like other companies, not from like people growing from the inside. But like a bootstrap company wouldn't be able to do that because they can't afford that. And then the third thing is that when you own like all of the equity, then you can be a lot more generous with the equity that you give out to employees because like you own all of it. So you can just decide to give your best employees a lot more equity. And that equity also has value today. So, and I think a lot of people like when they think more about it from first principles, they come to the same conclusion, which, like this might actually be a better approach. And like this is like maybe unintuitively, like a lot less risk. And yeah, by doing that, I think I was able to attract like extremely good candidates who had offers from like those like venture-backed companies that would seem from the outside as like a VC-backed brand. But I think, yeah, once you think about things from first principles, maybe you can like sway your opinion towards this direction.
You know, there's also something interesting is like once you scale to a certain amount of revenue, it's possible that you could actually just sell like employee shares, founder shares to investors as well.
Yeah.
If you ever wanted to do it instead of just raising sort of straight up, like raising preferred shares or something like that. But I thought was, I've never done this before, but I thought it might be interesting, even though, we've covered a lot of ground. Maybe we should actually just really quickly, if it's cool with you, talk through a few of the things you've written about in the past. You had this playbook that you published on X that we could link to about bootstrapping an AI agent business. And I thought there were some really interesting things here that maybe we could do like a lightning round on. You said if you're in B2B, just do the B2B stuff. What does that actually mean?
Yeah, I think especially for bootstrap founders, you tend to try to like force your B2B business to run like a B2C, app. And that's because customer acquisition is just cheaper in B2C. So like because you're bootstrap, maybe you don't want to spend a lot of money in acquiring customers and you're trying to build like this extremely product-led, like no one is going to talk to me. Self-serve app. And it just doesn't like, it can work, but you still have, like if you actually want to build something big quickly, I think the approach can be like product, like self-serve, and then attach like a sales-led on top of it, because at some point you're going to have like bigger customers and you're going to be talking to like a middle manager at like a public company. And that person, like, especially if your product is good and like there's like a lot of features and like it can do many things, that person will not spend like a week, like on your dashboard trying to make it work. Even if your product is extremely intuitive and very easy to use, it's just very hard to convince people to spend time in like setting things up. And a lot of people like value like talking to humans and like getting on sales calls and like understanding the product and making sure that this is like there is humans behind this. This is very valuable. And yeah, I think that's the only way you can continue to grow past a certain point.
And just really quickly, like when you added sort of the more sales oriented approach where you were actually talking to prospective customers versus it being self-serve, at what stage was the company? Like how much money did you have? How many customers did you have? Because you were originally fully self-serve, I believe. Yeah. So when did you add that layer?
Maybe like maybe like 6-7 months ago when we were like,
oh wow. So very, very recently in the scheme of things.
Yeah, because like before, like we grew a lot quickly, like in the last also year. So before then, like we didn't have, like it's just hard to hire salespeople because they're expensive, and getting on calls with customers and like going through like long sales process is expensive, and you can't just do that when you're bootstrapped and you don't have revenue. But after a certain point, we had the revenue and like we had the conviction that this will work. So we invested more into building a sales team, building like the sales-led approach, doing like the B2B stuff, doing the outbound, talking to customers and all of that.
So there were two points here. The first one, or this is number 2, is content is non-negotiable. And then number 3, which I think is very connected, is warm outbound is the lowest hanging fruit. Maybe talk about both of those at the same time, because warm outbound is probably a concept that most people haven't even thought of. They think of cold outbound typically. So maybe say how content being non-negotiable fits into like this warm outbound being sort of the biggest opportunity for a lot of people.
Yeah, so I think you can do 2 things. Like, as I said, there's 2 approaches. One is like the self-serve product-led. You're just basically doing marketing and like you're just hoping people go through the onboarding flow. You're treating it as like a B2C company. And then on the other end of the spectrum, it's sales-led. You just have like a landing page with a book a demo, and then you just have like salespeople try to connect with executives at big companies. But I think what's very interesting, and I think actually a lot of companies that are huge that I look up to are doing that, is a lot of both. They have the marketing, the media arm, as just like to get people familiar with the brand, to have more brand awareness. But they don't just leave it to them to like go on the product and sign up. They pull them, like they actually pull them by sending the emails, going on calls with them, and making sure that they go through the whole pipeline. So I think that's the idea of warm outbound. The good thing about content and marketing is that it makes everything else you do easier. Like it makes paid ads easier because people know your brand and like they're more likely to watch your content because they have seen you before. They're more likely to click on it because you have like social proof. So like organic content just makes everything else easier. It makes outbound easier because people have seen you before. Maybe someone like told them about you because of the content. It's just very powerful. It makes all the levers much stronger. And then sales works because it's been working for like, like the beginning of time. It's just talking to people and can like explaining the product and like making sure that it solves their problem. And I think combining both, you end up with like very strong companies like Stripe, for example, where it has like a very strong self-serve and like product and marketing and PLG growth. But at the same time, of course, they can support extremely large businesses and like they have the white glove onboarding and like all the forward deployed engineers you need because I think those are like the best companies. And that's the way I want to build Chatbase is attaching a sales approach on top of a strong content and product-led growth.
So really quick lightning round stuff here. Cold outbound, like what's the thing that you learned about cold outbound that was like the hardest lesson, but the most important?
Yeah, cold outbound, I think it works extremely well if you have a very big TAM. So like for a company like us, like just a customer facing agent, so like customer support, customer sales, and all of that customer facing interactions, of course, this is a huge market. And that means like if cold outbound works for anyone, it will work for us because like our just TAM is huge and we know the product works because it's working with other people that are using it through the self-serve flow. So I think then it becomes a numbers game. Then it becomes how much you're doing and how much you're willing to spend. And it's just like a formula at the end of the day, like CAC to LTV. And this is a part of it where you're thinking about it like maybe a B2C company. But I think that's like the approach of a lot of companies that are starting out now. And I think even bigger companies are seeing this is combining both like what people have been doing in B2C and what people have been doing in B2B and combining both for a very strong sales supported organization with very strong PLG motion.
So this is a really interesting one. Be friends with your biggest customers. A lot of solo founders I know have incredibly close relationships with the people that they serve. They're usually on like a texting basis with their early customers. What was the thing that you learned from that, or what's something that has been sort of surprising?
Yeah, I think for us it was extremely important and extremely easy too. Like I think maybe it's very like maybe not intuitive to someone like new to business to be friends with customers, especially when you're like us, we have 10,000 customers. So like, how are you going to be friends with them? But I think for us, it was very helpful because those biggest customers, we realized we have a lot in common with them because a lot of them are like executives or founders or, like big project managers at a big company. And a lot of the problems we're facing, they have faced too, and they have insights for us. We have insights for them. And it's just like very easy to find common ground and like find things to talk about. And then it's very helpful because you need your customers to be like brand ambassadors. So you need your customers to like have like you're growing from word of mouth is like huge for us because we have like a lot of customers in a lot of different industries. And when you have like one customer in one industry, but they actually love the product, they can't stop talking about it. And then you get more people from that industry. And you only get that, or like it helps when you actually know them like actually know them on a name-to-name basis. Like you have their phone number, you call them, and I think we started doing this maybe later than I wanted to, but I now realize that this is an extremely like undervalued, I would say, growth lever that people are not focusing on.
So the last two here are very closely tied together, which is pricing is the fastest lever and margins don't matter early on. Could you say something about those two and maybe how they relate to each other?
Yeah, I think pricing is interesting because there is no science behind it. Like it's, like I consumed all the content, the startup content about pricing. I talked to a lot of founders. Like the most common way people do things is experimenting. Like you just come up with a number, you put it on the site, or like you try it in a sales call and then see the reaction. That's like the only way people price, and like doing more of that is how you find the perfect price. So I think a lot of people do not realize that maybe they're pricing too low, and even maybe they're pricing too high, and they're losing out on customers. And by saying pricing is the fastest lever is because you can just change it. You can just decide to change it, and immediately you will see like feedback from the market. And you can say the same thing about like any of the other like efforts you're doing, but pricing has that advantage. So it doesn't make sense to not do that. You should be changing pricing a lot to find where the perfect price is when you're delivering, where customers want to use you, even if you're expensive, because you're delivering like a lot more value to them. And from what I've learned, like the only way to find that is by experimenting.
And then that second part about margins not mattering early on quite as much.
Yeah, I think this is more of a thing that I would say to bootstrapping or solo founders, especially because like the definition of a good business is like a business that does profit. And it's like when you first like see the VC world, it's like unintuitive, like how these many companies are not profitable. So some people are like, oh, I'm against VC, I'm gonna bootstrap. Or for some, I'm not against VC. Like I think my second company I'll probably raise. I think it depends on like what I'm doing. But I'm saying like some people are very religious about these things, and they decide like I'm just against everything. So I'm against like profitability. I'm against like not being profitable, even if it means I can grow faster. And my point here is it's much, much easier to cut costs than to get more customers and get more revenue. So I would say like in the beginning, if the goal is to like just build a big brand and a big company and something generational, of course you should sacrifice the $10 in cost if it means you're gonna get $10 in revenue, because you can like cutting cost is much easier than getting more revenue. And the revenue also like signals other things other than the, like the dollar amount. It signals like a new customer that's going to talk about you. It signals more brand awareness. It signals more money you can invest once you cut costs. So the money from revenue is much, much more powerful than whatever you're spending in terms of cost. And I think, yeah, a lot of bootstrap founders don't think about things that way. And I certainly didn't. And I think it made me a lot more slower in the beginning. But now it's much easier to be more aggressive because I know that.
That's super counterintuitive. And that's exactly the type of thing that people listen for. So I'm sure a lot of people will benefit from hearing that. And again, thank you for being on this. I think we want to close this out with sort of the two customary questions that we typically ask. The first one is sort of the bear case for being a solo founder, the reasons that maybe people shouldn't be. Because I think that obviously we think that solo founding is great. We think that it's an incredible opportunity and that some of the best companies will be built. In fact, it will probably be the default way that companies are built in the future. But at the same time, it's not all sunshine and roses or whatever, right? There's got to be some downsides to it. So what's the sort of the case against solo founders? And then, of course, the spoiler alert is we'll take a pause and we'll talk about that. But then afterwards, we'll talk about the case for it.
Yeah, I think the biggest bear case is how hard it is, especially in the beginning. I think having a co-founder, having someone as invested as you, as much as you, especially early on, just makes life much easier, especially when you have like trust in them and you can fully depend on them and you know they're smart and like you just some things in the business are handled because it's with them. And you can say the same thing about like any like good person on the team. But I think for a founder, especially early on, it's special because a lot of the early days is like you're trying to figure out what you're building, you're trying to figure out PMF, you're trying to get your first customer, and you want someone that has the same investment as you to go with you through all of these things. And then maybe the other, like, maybe bear case for solo founding is it just doesn't work for some businesses. Like if you're starting a research lab, like I don't know how you can do that as a solo founder, or maybe like some robotic, like especially the things where you need like a lot of technical expertise in like very specific domain, and you don't have that. Or if you do have that, maybe you don't have like the business aspect of things. So I think some businesses, it's just harder to do as a solo founder, or like maybe someone else will do it and like you're going to get them on the podcast, but it hasn't been proven that it's easy to do in some kinds of businesses. I think those are the main two in terms of like downsides of solo founding.
I guess let's flip it over then. I mean, I think that, by the way, a lot of those things are incredibly valid, especially the sort of loneliness and sort of like not necessarily having a thought partner. Sometimes that's valuable. Sometimes it's the challenge, right? Yeah. Sometimes you argue and whatnot, but sometimes that is really valuable, and that makes a lot of sense. So like, let's flip it over though from the bear case for solo founding. Like, what's the case for solo founding?
Yeah, I think the case for solo founding is that it's very hard to lose. I think the companies go out of business, or like startups, they crash because I think the biggest reason is co-founder breakup. Because if you don't have breakup, you can just like pivot, or you can just, like try to raise more money, or you can just like, there's a lot of other options. But co-founder breakup, when it happens, then like you have to, that's it. Like the company's not going to work out in most cases. I think I mentioned this before. I think having an amazing founder is better than having no co-founders, but having a slightly like below average co-founder is much, much worse than being solo. And I believe the case is like, you're going to end up in a lot of arguments. You're going to end up in like different opinions about different things. You're going to have like this gray area where like, it's not very clear who's supposed to have the final say in something. And when you're not able to like work out through these conversations, especially quickly, because you need to move fast and you can't have like 3-hour calls about like a small decision because both of you are like very, hard-headed about like this specific thing, then it's just like, even if you don't have a breakup, you're just going to be much, much slower as a company that's just like going through decisions as fast as they can. So yeah, I think that's honestly the biggest thing is, like co-founder breakups. And that's, maybe it's like one reason, but it's a huge reason to not do it. So I think if you don't know who that person is that you want to be as your co-founder, like you're starting a new company, you don't know who that person is, I would highly suggest, instead of like finding someone that you think maybe like checks off all the boxes, but you're not 100% sure, instead of doing that, then try solo, at least for like some time, and then see how it goes. Because you can always change your mind later. It's like a two-way door decision, right? So you can always bring in a co-founder if you think it's too hard. But yeah, that's also a good thing about solo founding is the optionality.
Maybe this is the last thing that you can comment on is we've definitely covered a lot of ground, but that specifically around like the decision making and sort of like being the sole decision maker. You went through a bunch of different ideas. You were working on a bunch of different projects. Maybe a co-founder wouldn't have gone on all those different little journeys with you to eventually land at Chatbase, right? Like it feels like in many ways that was a very personal kind of like exploration, experimentation period that yielded Chatbase. Hard to say if you were working with other people if that would have happened.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also hard. Like maybe if I did find an amazing co-founder, then like I would have like a much bigger success than Chatbase. But it's just very hard to predict these things. But I would say, like, I think being solo helped a lot with moving fast and just like I like the fact that everything is my fault, and like being solo gives me that satisfaction that everything is my fault.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for doing this. This is great.
Yeah, thanks for having me.